Good afternoon, everybody. I was just saying to somebody in the hallway that it doesn't get any better to spend a Friday afternoon talking about music, does it? So I thanks to Catherine and Peter for having us here and creating this nice little space that we can talk about music today, and we're going to be talking about creating a scene, and we got a pretty good scene going on here, I think. It's so nice to see people like Kelly Lee and my old friend Rob Frayne here, and so many of you that I haven't met today. That's it's just great. So my name is James Hale. I'm from Downbeat Magazine. Also write for SoundstageExperience.com, which, as I was just telling Rob, is actually a great set of sites, worldwide sites that are actually based here in Ottawa. So if you haven't checked out the Soundstage network yet, please do. There's lots of great music coverage on there. We have a great panel to talk about this idea of networking and audience development in the digital age. Let me introduce them. At the far end, we have a man who's told me not to worry about mispronouncing his last name, so he's an immediate friend of mine, Reiner Michael? Yeah, I'll get it. He comes to us from Cologne, Germany, where he began his career as a musician in 1976. He's the artistic director of the European Center for Jazz and Contemporary Music, also director of the Moors Festival, and radio and television producer. Rainbow Robert is a native of Montreal, which explains why it's Robert. And she's best known for her 22 years at the Vancouver International Jazz Festival and Coastal Jazz, where she now curates programming. She's also curated the Guelph Jazz Festival and is one of the driving forces behind Jazz Festivals Canada, which represents more than 20 of this country's leading festivals. Jordan David is an Ottawa native who has been responsible for a broad range of projects, most of which operate outside the mainstream. He's the co-founder of the music and arts collective Music Art People, which specializes in providing spaces where artists from different backgrounds and disciplines can come together and create. And he's also a talent buyer and stage manager for Queen Street Fair, which is a new venue here in Ottawa. And finally, to my left is Jan Ole's Otnæs, who is the artistic director of Oslo's Molde Jazz, which presents some 150 concerts a year. He's also the president of the European Jazz Network and a member of the Norwegian Arts Council. He founded the Northern Norwegian Jazz Forum in 1969 and booked Keith Jarrett for his first concert, and he's never looked back. He's probably dealt with easier artists ever since then too. Anyway, we are going to talk about creating a space, and I wanted to ask Rainbow the opening question, and I hope you all will jump in, and I will make time at the end for questions. But if something that we say up here spurs something that you want to get out there, by all means put your hand up, and I'll try to see you through the gloom and call on you. So question is, music scenes are as distinctive as the cities and the non-geographic communities they inhabit. For example, there's only one Austin, Texas, and there's just as though there's no other place as San Francisco was in 1966, or Harlem when it gave birth to bebop in the 1940s. So the question really is, given that nothing is exactly the same, what are the foundational elements for building a thriving scene in the 2020s? A scene that nourishes artists and builds audiences. And I will turn to Rainbow to enlighten us.
Well, it's my firm belief that we're defined by the way that we treat people, and being welcoming and respectful to everybody who's involved in this very multi-layered ecology that we're all a part of, I think is the key to building a scene. And as this relates to the overarching digital topic, I think we have an even more urgent task at hand. How do we maintain our humanity with all of these robots between us? How do we enhance the ways that we communicate with each other in order to offset the fact that we're so disconnected and often communicating from so far away? I believe that in terms of creating the scene in your own town and serving the community, that, every conversation that we have defines us. The way that we treat the people that we're talking to in any problem-solving moment is what defines us. And I think that we have a unique ability to really change things by making people feel welcome, by making artists feel respected. And I think that the real power that exists as human beings is that we can, in our own way, help to elevate the already superb music that we are serving as curators and festival producers by just infusing the whole experience with just paramount levels of respect. And I think that what comes out of this is if, without asking, if you happen to know what kind of a bottle of wine somebody wants, if you see somebody who, simple acts that are very much the best that we have as human beings, I think make people feel so at home and so appreciated that the music comes across in a different way. And then the audience responds in a different way. And everybody knows that they came to the right gig. And, people aren't sitting there wondering, am I being reached by the music? And then artists aren't on stage wondering, are we reaching people with our music? The artists feel fantastic. They're like, oh my God, how did they know that was the bottle of wine I wanted? Everybody feels great. The music comes across like gangbusters, and everybody sits there thinking, oh my God, this is how I want a musical experience to feel. So, my name's Rainbow. It's a bit of a hippie sentiment, surprise. But I think that the quality of the experience that we aim to create is built upon respect and the ways that we can underscore that respect for each other at every turn.
Great. Anyone else want to jump in on that?
Yeah, I can jump on. I think it's equally as important to really focus in on the audiences who are coming to these shows. More often than not, it's the audience who, could be a musician, could be a writer, a photographer. So just keeping an open mind, and as presenters, we're always looking for the next best thing. But the next best thing could be in front of us. So an example, I think of, David Mancuso, 1970. This is New York disco era. He was throwing parties in a space called The Loft, and people who were going to these events, Frankie Knuckles, talking about like David Morales, these guys went on to shape the sounds of dance music. So I think it's kind of like, it's interesting to know that no matter what we're doing, people are there and willing to sort of share their talents. So just trying to offer space for those people to do so. I know here in Ottawa, we're very lucky to have, great folk scene, great jazz scene, a lot of things happening in the city, and I think it's important for us to go and experience it, like go and actually support these artists and support these scenes, because if we don't do it, who's going to do it? We can complain about, there's nothing to do, or I wish this would happen. You have the power to do things in your city. That's the biggest thing as well. Like, you can wait for someone to do it, or you can just do it yourself. It's not underestimating the audience, and also not underestimating yourself, because we're often waiting for permission to do these things, but sometimes you have to pull the trigger and just do it and learn from it and grow.
Yeah. Jan, as I said, you've been presenting shows since 1969, and I think, from our perspective over here in North America, when we look at around the world at scenes, the Norwegian scene often seems like kind of a model for a lot of things, because it's always been kind of vital. I was asking you about, your experience in given that space of time, but also, like, what do you see as the Norwegian scene? What have been the elements that have made it come together and made it as successful and influential as it has become?
Well, I used to point at 3-4 factors that has been super important in Norway. Already in the early 50s, we got a Norwegian Jazz Federation that has been a very well organized system of jazz clubs, festivals, regional jazz centers, big bands, and musicians. And we were quite early well connected with the authorities and got funding got public funding, first from the local, and after some years also from the Ministry of Culture and from the Arts Council. The second one is that we have a generation of musicians that came up with ECM in the late 60s, Jan Garbari, Terje Rypdal, Jon Christensen, Arild Andersen, and also Karin Krogh. And they recruited new musicians. And a lot of the guys that they recruited also became big artists on ECM. And they recruited new ones. So ECM and the generation that came up in the late 60s has been super important. And then we got a jazz education in Trondheim, which has been a very vital thing that helped us a lot. And for the venue that I run today, Victoria, the national jazz scene, in Oslo from the 60s and up till today, we had a lot of good venues presenting jazz, but they come and went away. We never had anything stable. So to get funding for a stable scene, we presented an idea for the government in the late 90s that we have a national opera, we have a national theater, we have a national gallery. We should have a national scene for jazz. And it took us 6 years to convince the authorities that we should have a jazz scene. So now we have Victoria, national jazz scene, been running now for 12 years. We have stable funding from the government. We are able to present a lot of different music on this scene. And the idea when we created this was to embrace the whole jazz community in Oslo and also in the rest of the country. So we have a series of jazz by kids, not for kids, but young musicians playing. They're from 6-8 to 13, 14 years old. Then we have a series at Victoria called Unheard, where we present young emerging artists. Most of them come from the conservatories, but some are educated, but this is the emerging. And we do different talent developing programs, and then we have the main program where we present around 140 concerts per year, the best of national, international jazz. So that's the way we have built the community and the scene that now is a quite successful one. So this weekend is the third weekend of this season, and we have already sold 60% of the budget of the tickets. So we're in a quite lucky situation, and we are not going commercial.
I'm still trying to get my brain back together after you said national jazz program. But that raised a question for me. So in terms of government funding for a national jazz program, how do you keep that funding stable as governments change, as they will?
I mean, when we got this funding, it was the Labour Party who gave the first signal. But there have been no changes. It has been growing regularly from year to year. And even when we got this quite right-wing government, they agreed that this is a good idea, we should continue on this. And they told us yesterday that the Arts Council got a doubling of the funding here. And I'm part of the Arts Council in Oslo now, in Norway now, and we have a solid funding for festivals and venues. We have like 30 million Canadian dollars for funding festivals and venues in Norway.
Reiner, from your perspective in Western Europe, talk to us about your experience with building a scene. Both funding and also connecting with audiences and building audiences.
Coming back to building a scene, I think you cannot build a scene.
That's the fun of a panel.
Will develop itself, so you cannot build it. So just the examples you mentioned, like San Francisco in the 60s or Harlem in the 40s, there was nobody to build it. Of artists, and not only musicians, and neither jazz musicians, artists from all over the place. And if there is a critical mass of it, if they come together, it might happen that it becomes a scene, what we call a scene, or that something new starts. And it needs also cheap spaces to live, to work, and it needs also a sort of an audience who are the partners of the artists in a way. So it's big, obviously big metropolitan areas, like New York. Is it now in this part of the world? I guess it's still the place. I always think there should be a change, but it's the place, and still is becoming a new a new cultural hotspot, and there's a scene, definitely, and it's growing and growing. Artists coming from all over the world, and still there's cheap spaces, and that's the ingredients what you need for a scene. Not to build it, because you cannot build it. You can destroy it by gentrification. Then it's destroyed, like they did in Amsterdam, Danielle. Like there was a lot of, so they put out the culture out of downtown Amsterdam, but let's call me tomorrow. No, so it's definitely not a question about building. It exists, and when we break it down to jazz, to our thing, improvised music, it's even more crucial. It's more important to have this amount, this critical mass. As a painter or a composer or a writer, you could sit in your cabin anywhere for a year and do your thing, and then you go out to your audience with your book or your composition or your painting. If you're an improvising musician, you have to play every day, best twice a day, and always in very every changing combinations to get better, to improve your art. You have to play. You have to be in a mass of people. So the more there are, the more choice you have, the more you can improve your skills to be a good improviser. And and there is no art than ours, which is more depending on being in a big area. So I think this is so what we can really see in the world, and all the smaller cities, like my city, like Cologne, there is a scene, sure, and it's probably the world's most important scene for the ones who are there. But from a higher perspective, it's not. So there, to my what I see is there are two ones in the world. This is New York, and it's Berlin coming up. So, and that's the hubs or the hotspots where things happens. And I guess I don't know, but I guess if a musician here in Ottawa will, so there's a limit for creating an international career, and if he or she wants to really to do it, probably will change the city and will move to either Berlin or New York.
We're talking in the context.
If he or she wants to really to do it, probably will change the city and will move to either Berlin or.
We're talking in the context of the digital age. How has technology changed those elements of the scene, as it were? What tools has it brought to bear in terms of making it easier for a scene to grow organically, but also for it to expand beyond the local into the larger realm?
Hasn't changed. So we're talking about maybe the most analog art form there is, or one of the most analog art forms. It happens in the moment, just in the moment, here, in together with an audience, and it happens if the audience is breathing the same air than the musicians, if it's in one room, and that's so analog. So the digital thing comes, it's when it comes to distribute the music or communicate around it, that has changed completely. But the music itself or the art itself there's no change. What changed is so there are two ways of seeing it. We got rid of the filters, or we're missing the filters. Musicians may say, so we got rid of these fucking filters. We don't need a record company anymore because we're doing it ourselves. We maybe don't need the presenters or promoters because we can spread our music on the website. We're just doing it. For others, like for audiences and others, they might missing the filters because there's so many music around, and we're talking always about good and bad, good music. There's only good and bad music. I always say there's only good and very good music, but the difference between the good and the very good is very small, and it needs time to find out what is very good. So, and if you see what it has cost even 20, 30 years ago to make a record, to go, to recording machines or of videotaping or just making something video from your band. Now it's an iPhone. You can make recordings with an iPhone, which is good. You can make a video with your iPhone, which is good quality. So, and the distribution in the early days where you have at the radio or TV, which was, filtering. There was no chance of distribution without radio or TV. Now nobody cares for radio and TV. Nobody is interested in that because you have your own distribution system on the net. You can spread out whatever you want for almost no money. It doesn't cost anything. Distributing your art. It's not only music, but we're talking about music. So that means everything around the art itself has changed through the digital. Our work has changed completely. The work of musicians, journalists, everybody, but not the art itself.
Rainbow, you're one of the few people I know who has worked in both a very large community, Vancouver, and also done some curating in a small community, Guelph. What are the commonalities that you see in terms of those kinds of communities in a music scene or a music community? What is the stuff that makes it work from your perspective?
Well, I think that whether we're working with a massive event in a large urban center or a smaller event, that really the intent and the ultimate goal is to make people feel at home and cozy and in the right place. And I think that we create many layers of that within an event such as the Vancouver Jazz, 100 gigs over 10 days. But the music that moves me personally the most as a curator is the more avant-garde, more outraged, more, really super, like in the moment. It's very on fire. It's right there. It's happening. And it might not be for everybody, but we're kind of trying to create we do a lot of that music at a place called the Ironworks, where we're really creating the same vibe that you would have at the equivalent spot for the same kind of music in a place like Guelph. Guelph was amazing because it was a festival that was purely avant-garde, so that was just like such a great invitation. I did it 5 years ago, and I was like, oh, will you come and step in and curate this small, purely avant-garde festival? And I was like, absolutely. Yes, please. It was kind of a big dream, really, to be able to just focus on the part that I personally find is the part that's most compelling and that gives me the inspiration to do all of the rest of the work that happens in a festival like the Vancouver Jazz Festival, which is larger. And I think in the larger festival, we're just trying to create multiple vignettes that feel a certain way. We're trying to, if a person were to take a day and to go from one venue to the next across, you could even look at this through the digital sphere. These are like holodeck experiences for anyone who watched Star Trek. You want to push the button, okay, I'm going to be in a jazz club and hear something that's going to really change the way that I think. Or now I want to be on a sunny field with a picnic basket listening to some gorgeous music from somewhere completely across the world. And I think that's really what we're creating. We're creating these experiences for artists and audiences, and for all of those of us who work together to make these things happen, where, we're in a world where we need to tap back into our inspiration. We're in a world that's filled with challenges and turmoil. And if we can create these small vignettes from moment to moment where we feel like we've been on a number of journeys, that we've joined together with the same people within a bunch of different contexts over the course of a day or a week or an entire festival, I think the way that music can transport us together to a place where we feel connected again as human beings is really where we're trying to get to. And I feel that that goal is the same either within a small, cozy, sweet, like purely out there festival, or a festival that has many different layers that's creating a bunch of different feelings as you travel through the journey.
Jordan, you specialize in a lot of smaller, projects and a lot of DIY projects and when you build from something that is specialized like that into a broader scheme, in other words, how do you bring audiences into what you're creating? because if I was the cynical old journalist, oh wait, I am. Looking at one of your projects, I might say, oh, that's got a very niche kind of audience. What are the tools that you use, and what are the things that have been successful with you?
Said, doing things in small spaces, there's a bit of a forgiveness to that. If you know everyone who's coming to your shows, you get that feedback right away. And again, feedback is so important. So if I were to do something in a small cafe, we might be able to play a bit more, have a bit more freedom with the space and what we're doing, and then to extrapolate that and bring it to a space like the Ottawa Art Gallery. Well, if you have that freedom to kind of explore and play, I think that's a big part of it. You need to develop your skills and develop your audience as well. And I think things like streaming, these things help with sharing that message. But yeah, for me, I think a big part of that is just sort of whatever space it is, big or small, we just try to curate to that room and make it the best thing we can do possible. So we obviously utilize things like, Instagram and YouTube and all the tools that we all know about. But I think, again, it's like, can we record these sets? Can we put them on SoundCloud? Connect to the bigger audience that's out there. So, I'm doing a niche thing in Ottawa, but the reality is, like, these are big things in the world. And to you, it might seem like, it's nothing, but some people it's their world. So I don't take it lightly. And I think it's one of those things where you have to realize your limitations, work with that, but be ready for the storm, be ready for that big opportunity when it comes. And when it does come, you've had that practice in small spaces to deliver on a bigger level.
Cool, yeah. Jan, I mean, you started out, as I said, in 1969, and those of us of a certain age, or even maybe younger, kind of look back at the 60s as saying, like, that was the heyday of alternative music, that it was in the air, it was common culture in those days. But you have been successful now for 50 years. What changes have you gone through, and what tools have you found in terms of digital technology, since that's our overarching theme here? Have you discovered that translate to what you do, and how have you continued to be successful in terms of building audience?
I mean, the digital tools is most important in marketing, as we were talking about in the former panel. So we did a research among our audiences 3 years ago and found that hardly anyone read ads in the newspapers. They get the information through these program books, through Facebook and through our website. That's the way. So we have cut the use of traditional media with 60%, and the audience still come. And one thing we have done since 2014 is to live stream 10 to 20 concerts per year. And online, when it happens, we have an audience of between 200 and 2,000. And a year after, some of these shows has been watched 50,000 times. So we spread the news and we spread the music via these channels, and that's the new thing for us. And it's important. And the content is owned by the artists themselves, so they can use it for free to promote their shows and their things later. And we keep some of the songs or whole concerts on our website. So that's an important way to spread the thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting to note that going back to the 1970s, I remember being in Switzerland in 1973 and staying at a and on their TV set when we came back from dinner was a concert from the Montreux Jazz Festival, which was astounding to me because that kind of thing did not happen here in Canada. And it's interesting that we've almost kind of come full circle. And when you look at running a small club on St. Catherine Street and videotaping every show they put on, and then marketing those shows, and then that spawned the jazz festival, which has become the largest one in the world, and continued to market things through video. It's almost like those lessons were out there for us to pick up on, and we're still sort of struggling with how to use those things. Reiner, what's your experience in terms of what Jan was talking about, in terms of as you've gone through decades of growing audiences, what tools have you used that have been successful, and what are the particular learnings that you could share?
You mentioned two dangerous examples like Montreal and Montreux, because these both festivals are not existing because they are interested in a certain content. They only interested in success. That's their secret. It's not a secret. It's very obvious. So they're giving people what they want, which is the best if you want to have success. Don't bother people. Give them. If they want to hear Carlos Santana, put him in a jazz festival, and he becomes a jazz musician. So that's a very easy process. What is quite successful, and that's if we talk about this. So then, yeah. So that's not my cup of tea. I'm more into the music, and I don't care at the first moment whether there's an audience for it. If I would become two different results. So I'm into music, and look, is that thousands of versions which I've heard before, or is it something which is interesting because it might not be existing before? So, and then I try to find a stage for it and try to promote it. And back to the digital area. So yes, So yes, there is a lot of. It's much easier to distribute, to communicate, to make marketing, to advertise things with the help of digital tools, which is cheaper. But again, so we are in a big flow, in a big sea of information, and how to filter, how to get your audience, how to get the right, to headhunt the right people. And again, so the decision you make as a promoter, presenter, and also to this what we call market is the decision starts. Are you going for your content first, or are you going for your success? So that's when you start. And most of us are talking about a market, but it is not a market. A market usually is defined by demand and supply, and we're not talking about supply. We are demand. It's musicians are supplying, and then we look for the demand. This is always the order, like it happened. And my experience, that was your question, is very, very different all over the years, because we all know that if we promote Keith Jarrett or the likes, it's not easier. Our job is not easier then, but to sell tickets is easier. But that is a decision we always make, and if we're in a festival situation like Rainbow, it's a big festival in Vancouver, she has to show some big names, otherwise she wouldn't survive, I'm in a comfortable position in the festival I'm doing now, so there's a mayor who gives me money to do whatever I want, so that I don't need to sell tickets, which is a very comfortable, but it's not the rule, it's an exception, so Rainbow knows what I'm talking about. So, but I have a mayor who has headhunted me to look only into content and not into success. So that's the thing. But if you are in a market situation, if you are depending on ticket sale, then you have to always to make compromises and to give people what they want. Last night they wanted Stevie Wonder. Okay.
Jordan, Reiner makes a great point about, and he did before as well, about you remove the gatekeepers, as it were, and digital technology has allowed us to reach broader, numbers of people than we've been able to do before. But by the same token, there's so much noise out there. There's so much competition for people's attention, and people's attention spans have shortened, as we all know. And we're all here in this business because we love the music, we love the art, but we want that art to reach people. So how do you break through the noise, especially when you're doing things on as I said, on the margins. You're not working in terms of broad mainstream art. How do you cut through the noise and reach the people that should be hearing this art?
That's a great question. Yeah, I think it takes time to find your audience. So what I've done, I've relied on traditional things like mailing lists. These things go a long way. So if we're trying to present an artist, that we need 200 people there, well then I'm going to look at other shows that are happening in my city and really analyze, other promoters and their audiences and see if there's a crossover. I think, just build from there. It can be a slow thing. Like I'm not presenting, 10-day festivals with lots of funding. That's not where I'm at this point. But on that lower level, on that smaller level, there's an audience you have to find. You have to be creative about where you find that audience. So we just basically go to other shows, we meet people, and that, don't underestimate that power of just that connection of word of mouth. That's a big part of it too. We're talking about online stuff, but again, you have to go out there and meet people, hand billing, like these things go a long way. So back to when I'm trying to present something and trying to get people excited about it, I might buy some ads online, and really, think about where I want those ads to be placed, using traditional postering. I'm doing everything I can to make sure I'm maximizing that exposure. And then, relying on community radio, relying on community papers, blogs. If I can get my audience with another audience, boom, we've done the thing of creating a successful event. So, yeah, I think just going back to, using the tools that are there, but also just hitting the street as well. And again, going out to concerts and events and just meeting the people who are doing it.
I'm cognizant of my dear. He's anticipated. He's anticipated.
I had a question. It seems like your. Oh, it seems like your kind of model is kind of centralized, and it seems quite successful from a country point of view. Do you think it was how do you think you guys got there? Do you think it was a mass effort, or was it a few people, or you know what I mean? It's the model that you're describing is quite enticing and really cool. So yeah, my question is how do you think you got there? How do you think other places would get there?
Well, I think the most important thing is that we had a good community and a demand for places to play. And so that things, if we didn't have all the musicians we have and the demand for good venues, we didn't get there. And we had results from day one. It has taken 7-8 years to come where we are now, but we had an immediately good reaction.
I might try to cover that question from the outside. Yeah. Because we are always interested in the phenomena, in the Norwegian secret and what happens there, because we all are overwhelmed by, and I'm traveling Norway since 20 years. I think it's a lot of topics which came together. To me, who did something very important. He invented a form of improvised music to Norwegian folk music in a way. He found the roots in his own country. And the country, Norway, is in a very different position in Europe. It's the edge. It's not a migrant country. It's the edge. Norwegians. Sorry for saying it, but have a good portion of nationalism. And they are really they try themselves to make a big difference to the U.S. Americans. Because also for that oil thing, because the Americans were the first ones, they found the oil and tried to make a business out, and the Norwegians said, "Oh, no, we make the business on our own." They're very self-confidential about what they do, and they started to find out that there is something they have in their own country. And Jan Garbarek, or you can say Jan Bang, for example, another musician, and Jan Garbarek together was invited for the marriage of the king, when the son of the king had a marriage, the crown prince. So they played in the church to jazz musicians. You know, the level of respect, of acceptance, because they're heroes. Like you might have ice hockey guy. I don't know the name of the most famous successful ice hockey guy, but Jan Garbarek is on that level in Norway. No, he's really, and to have this person, and everybody likes him, and some other, and you had also a cultural ministry, was the wife of Jan Christensen. So they had a cultural ministry. You know, she was the wife of a drummer, of a jazz drummer on the road. Main thing is they had the money. They are so incredible rich. They had the money, and they spent it for all education. They found out that spend all our money in our youth, in our future. Spend it all. They have all the educational process in Norway is, you know, jazz is, this is nothing compared to what they do for education, for all their kids. And but serious parts are going into the arts. And just a little is going into jazz, but it's for all of it, it's, you know, it's big, but in Norwegian relationship, it's still a small portion. You know, they do a lot.
Yeah, and we had some ministers that came from the rock side and the pop side, and they said, why should this music be treated different than the classical music? And we don't have a very strong tradition on classical music in Norway. So it was easy to switch and to treat jazz, pop, folk music the same way as they had done with the classical music.
I will never forget my first visit to Oslo in 1999, when I was trying to convince the Norwegians to support my program, Music from the North. So that I want to make a big showcase with a lot of musicians from Norway. I went to the foreign ministry, the royal foreign ministry in Oslo, so trying to convince to support the travel costs. In these days, there were no cheap carriers, so no low-cost carriers. It was really expensive to bring people from Norway to Germany. And I was a little bit, he asked me, how many musicians do you want to invite? And I was a little bit shy with my, I have a long list, on my list are 70 musicians. He said, 70, this is half a symphonical orchestra. Go ahead, no problem, we take care. So I was expecting maybe to get 20. He said, take the 70, no. And it was quite expensive. It was about 1,000 German mark in these days, because it was on a Tuesday, not on a weekend flight. It was Tuesday or Thursday. I came home with literally 30,000 German marks in these days. I was, what's up there? So they supported and they won. It's a good, also a natural patriotism, also to support and bring Norwegian, may I say Viking music.
Do as you like.
By the way, there was the first ones to found here. Leif Erikson. It was not Christopher Columbus, if anybody thought it was the Vikings. So. Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. It was Newfoundland, by the way.
So jazz is, for the most part, a very intimidating art form. And I think what technology has done, certainly in the last 20 years, is really democratize the art form by eliminating a lot of the barriers, certainly of access to the music itself. But it's also made the hearing of the music less intimidating for people who don't know a lot about the music, and it's taken it from the clouds and made it made it available to the curious who don't have a lot of the education or the musical education or the chops to received observation.
I can confirm, yes, absolutely. As I said, it's a good and the bad at the same time. The good is you get rid of control, you get rid of filters from a musician's point of view. From an audience point of view, they lost orientation, because where is the right way? What is good and what is very good? You know, where's the tool of information? Where can I get some help, assistance to find out if I'm not myself being able to judge whether it's good or very good? So who could help me? My friends, or is there a newspaper or a journalist in a newspaper whom I trust? And then the next question is he still, could he make a living of his job? That wasn't the topic in the first roundtable. So, because I don't know, I don't know any journalist in Europe who can make a living with his job, except he's working in a public radio station. That's the only ones left, and they fighting for their. So, but yeah, it's a good thing and a bad. So the democratic process sounds good. You know, sounds transparency, democracy sounds good. But on the other side, you know, yes. So we could easily come to the question: why do these big country, Great Britain, with these founders of democracy, why do they leave the European Union? You know, is another. But you know, if we talk about transparency, democracy, about something went wrong sometimes. You know, it's not all is good. So I have my doubts. You know, that is. So the good and the bad. Good is opening. You know, there's more chances for musicians to spread their music into the world. But what is the truth? What is the real good one? What is the real good shit? And what is the fake?
I'll make a small addition to that, which I think that in this digital world, with all of the tools and all of the streams of information that are coming at us so rapidly, and we're always being told what to like, what to want, what to like, what to want. And I think it's very difficult for people to understand what to like or what to want. You're sitting there looking up at a wall of 700 flavors of kombucha thinking, oh, God, help me. What's left of me to innovate? What's left of me to care? You know, this is ridiculous. And so I think, in a way, it's a little bit our role, and we're all working within the same realm together. And I think it's our job to let people know where they might want to be, instead of what they think they like. And then the experience is open. It's like, man, I know if I go to that place, I'm going to feel good. The people in there are going to be cool. Everybody's going to be welcoming, and it's going to be a bit of a mystery. And then the openness of mind comes to you, and that's when new musical experience gets through, I think. I think that how are any of us supposed to decide what we like or what we want when we're constantly being told, like, you need this, you like this? But I think it's quite easy for us to think, like, we all know within ourselves on a given night, like, where do you really want to be? Who do you want to be hanging with? And if you're hanging with the people you want to be hanging with and the music is beautiful, everything's possible, and the real connection is there. Like, that, I feel, is the victory, where people come together and bring each other together through the music.
Absolutely take what Reiner, you said earlier about the band and the audience breathing the same air. That was a really powerful message. But is there there, for whatever reason, geography or whatever reason, they're not going to be in that same space? Is that a valid part of that scene in this music?
So the art form we're talking about is probably, I guess, between 30 and 40,000 years old. So we don't know exactly about how old is music, really, but we can see if the paintings, the cave painters, they started 40,000 years ago on a high level. So I guess at the same time there was music around. So we're talking about an art form which is quite old, and the ingredients, the secrets, or the mechanism of this is always the same since 40,000 years. There's, the digital thing is just the environment, but the music. And I believe in this picture, breathing the same air, musicians, and because that's our unique selling proposition. This is what we have. So the movies is different, writer, books, painters. What we have is the moment. And I even don't believe in recordings. You know, for me, a recording is like the newspaper from yesterday. And I just learned what happens with the newspaper from yesterday is for the cat. You know, so so it's recorded music is, if it's improvised music, it's, you know, it's in the moment. It's just, and you're there or you're not there. You have to be there in that very moment when musicians doing their thing, you're there or not. If you have missed it, you have missed it. So and you can record it, but it's never the same thing, you know, and that's what we have. And I'm so proud about it. And, you know, because that's only we have that, you know, and we should give it out of our hands, you know, and therefore any
of a bunch of cavemen sitting around watching the first guy throw down this amazing, like, painting on the stone. They're like, man, like, how are we going to deal with our art now? This dude just painted this giant thing on the stone. We used to just stand there and look at the stone, and we would figure it out for ourselves. And now this guy, you know, like, so I'm sure there have been many dialogues. I think, you know, it's all ripples, and that we, you know, maintain our commitment and our passion about the thing and love it. When we love it.
Remember that record called New Thing at Newport? This is New Thing at Mesopotamia.
Exactly.
You remember that record called New Thing at Newport? This is New Thing at Mesopotamia. Another question? I think we have time for one more. No? We've covered it all. All right, Peter.
I guess I will hog the questions. I guess my kind of final question, this is for all of you, is you all come from totally different scenes, and is there something you would impart that you think works in your scene? You know, I think there's always, like, the grass is always greener somewhere else in a way. And having spent some time in New York, even in New York, which is a great hub of improvised music, musicians are struggling like crazy, yet they still go there and they still do this. But it's not an easy place to do it. So I know musicians would have something to say about, from there, what works and what doesn't. So I guess my question is, would you impart something that works from your scene that we could take away? We can do this over a beer later too.
I've got a tiny piece, which is for a lot of festivals, or something that I hear when I'm talking to artists about how the local art is handled within the context of festivals. Most festivals, and by design, have to set up all of the touring work, and then they fit the local work in between. And the level of respect with which the local work is seen and treated and given prominence within the program, I think, is super important. And as programmers, obviously, we have to do all of the highly complex touring stuff first. But in my mind, I feel like I'm often selecting that stuff in order to feed inspiration into the local scene. And then the next step is to find out, like, who of these people is going to most inspire some of the most inspiring people in the local scene, and then putting them all together. So that actually creates a scene where the scene is growing, the inspiration from some of the greatest music that's happening in the world is brought back in service of and as an offering to the local community, and that the local community is where we live, and it is the most important. So for me, I'm very fortunate enough to work with artists from all over the world, and there's so much beautiful music in the world, but my heart lives for the local artists, and I really like the way it sounds in my town. Like when the festival's not happening, I go out to gigs, and you can hear all of those streams. You can hear that music. The sound in the city changes, and the people become more inspired, and it makes the place a really nice place.
Patting a bunch of people in the back here. From an Ottawa perspective, I'm looking out at the room, and I'm seeing a lot of examples of what you're asking about. I'm seeing Rob Frayne, I'm seeing Kelly Lee, and yourself, Peter, and Judy, and I think what it takes is that people put place over, I don't want to say place over career, but they value the place they're in, and they bring their art to the place they're in. And you know, Reiner said about you know, the choice between art and programming, or Berlin, by choosing Ottawa or Oslo or wherever you are and staying there and making your art there. I think that makes such a tremendous statement on a personal level, and trying to build the audience from within, like saying, I'm going to stay here because this is my home, and I will make my art here. Can we hear it for our panel today? Yeah. Thank you so much for coming out.